What's up, guys? So here we are back with our final story animation for the Rockfeller video. It's been a long process, but hopefully you can see it's all coming together and you can see exactly how we go about tackling these animations, which are really massive jobs to undertake. So let's dive straight into slate 4 of the Rockfeller animation.
He started building his own oil refineries. Now, Scott was in direct competition with John, so John interpreted this as declaration of war. He decided to launch an all-out attack against America's most powerful company.
So I think the idea of this one is that we're going to have Thomas Scott looking over an empty field, and up pops all his empire kind of growing out the ground, and then we'll pan up and we'll kind of see John and Tom head to head, all angry, pan out, and we're going to see the Pennsylvania Railroad be under attack, essentially. So what I know I'm going to need is maybe a rock or something for to have in the foreground for Thomas to stand on, and then we also need a person maybe in a suit who has his arms out, and we can kind of maybe have him raising his arms as if he's kind of with powers or magic or whatnot, raising this empire to life. So I'm just going to go to Unsplash and find what I need. There we go, found a bloke with a suit. That is exactly what we need. Bring this into AI upscale, and then also bring it into Photoshop, where we're going to cut out our character from the background. Going to grab some hills as well, sort of a base as to where the empire is going to be grown. I'm going to grab like a rock face, because I like this image here. I kind of want our friend looking out over his empire, so I want kind of a rock for him to stand on, almost biblical, like when Moses brought down the 10 Commandments or something. So we'll cut that out and we'll bring them all into After Effects, and we'll start arranging them in space. And just, it doesn't need to be perfect to begin with. We just need to kind of do broad strokes. We can clean everything up as we go, but we just need to kind of get a sense of where our animation's going. And we'll bring the man in the suit is in the same Z position as the rock cut out, and we'll make sure that they are, and we'll line them up nicely. And let's have a basic look at where the camera's what the camera's gonna be doing. So if we just mess around with the Z control, that looks really good to me. I mean, we're seeing kind of like how this scene is going to kind of grow into what it becomes. So we're going to keyframe the Z position. Just have it start quite zoomed out on the scene. And then we'll get to push in, and we'll see that the empire is kind of going to grow up on the hill as we push in. So let's have a look at what else we want to add to the scene. We know we're going to want like kind of a factory in the background. Maybe put that behind the hill, and they can just kind of pierce up. Nice, just put that in 3D space. Push it way back in the distance. Pre-compose it just so we can manipulate it independent of the top composition. We'll probably want to do that with our man in the suit as well. That's usually a good rule of thumb, by the way, guys. A pre-comp away from our top comp is usually a smart move, because if you want to manipulate something or manipulate a layer or do kind of layer masks, if you're adding all extra alphas or like overlays within the top comp, that comp is quickly going to go out of control. So wherever you can, think about working backward, and it's much cleaner, much easier for you to kind of see what you're animating. So I've pre-composed my background city. I'm using a CC rep tile to mirror the city image, just so I've got enough of it to kind of like spread across the screen. Grab our cooling tower that we made in the last video. Let's start whacking a few of them around the 3D layer. And we bring a sky in as well. Like go to our new background comp and bring a sun in, like an eclipse or something. That'd be cool. This is going to be a little bit of a challenging city to kind of cut around because it's such an old photo. So I'm just going to do it manually. It'll take a bit of time. It'll be worth it in the end. So let's just trim around the refinery. There we go. And now it looks like great. So now it looks like we've got this time-lapse sky with the sun kind of setting behind the factory. It's nice coloring as well. It's like quite desaturated. It's kind of sepia. It's kind of it's in keeping with what we are looking to achieve. And that sun's kind of setting behind the refinery, which is way in the background. So I'm liking how that's looking. I'm going to introduce a few more hills, just kind of fill up to add some extra layers to the shot. Cut them out, put them back in space. Cool, so now I'm preparing to look up at the sky and see Thomas Scott and Rockfeller pretty much head to head in full confrontation mode. So let's see how that's gonna look. So we get to the closest movement in our Z push in. The camera pushes in, and the camera then pans up and pretty zooms in as well. So the camera pushes in, Great, and let's see it in position. Camera pushes in and then pans up. Great, that's exactly what we're looking for. Obviously, we still got the cities in shot, and we start to see borders, but that's fine. We can work on all that later. It's not a big deal. Again, it's just broad strokes. We just want to kind of get this camera movement locked up. It's really difficult. The best way to animate, guys, is to like do, you know, bare bones camera movements, basic kind of animations as temps. And then you just kind of stack it up. So you do a whole animation of your composition. You gradually get more and more and more. Cool. And now we're just looking at our final position of our composition once we're at act of war. So we go from up, and then we're coming back down and along, So from Thomas Scott and Rockfeller, just kind of head to head, we're going to come back down, and we're going to bring the camera out. And again, just messing around with those keyframes in our graph editor just to make it look a little bit more organic. As we do these, we're going to start, as I say, we're going to start seeing borders. We're going to start seeing the edges of stuff. So it really is just about kind of nudging things in position, scaling them up, and kind of messing around with the position of the camera, just so we can kind of cut out the borders of that we're going to reveal as the camera and the animation progresses. So we got our pan in, the camera's set in, loving this. We're panning up. We're seeing Thomas and Rockfeller, and then we're panning back down and probably along as well. Nice, this is looking really good. This is really good. Now we're gonna make a composition of when we look into the sky. I want to see Thomas and Rockfeller head to head. So I'm gonna do this in a new composition just to keep everything nice and clean. And I'm gonna make a new composition. I'm gonna match it to the composition size of our actual composition, of our top composition, and I'm gonna call it Act of War. And I'm gonna find some new images of Rockfeller and Thomas. I want some old looking ones that preferably would look like they kind of match. So yeah, as old images as possible, I'm going to get off the internet, take it into Photoshop, scale it up with AI, and same old, cut them out and bring it into After Effects. So we're now in an Act of War composition. And the idea is that Thomas Scott and Rockfeller are going to start with their heads out, and they're going to bring their heads together and looking all angry. Maybe we'll add some fire and explosions and stuff just to kind of add to the drama. So let's scale them up to where their final positions are going to be. Yeah, we want to flip Rockfeller, so hit our scale, press S on our keyboard, hit the unchain button, and then press minus on the X value. That'll flip Rockfeller. And now lock them back up, and we can scale him any way we want. Yeah, let's pre-compose Rockfeller and Thomas so we can manipulate them independently. We'll call that TS, and we'll call it JDR. So we now have our pre-comps with the two characters. Let's sharpen them up a little bit because these are slightly lower res images than I'd like to usually work with. Cool, now we're going to start animating them in position. So we'll start with John coming in from the right, and I think we'll also have them rotate. So it's kind of like their heads come up into shots. And make sure we hit motion blur. Boom. John coming in from the right, Thomas coming in from the left. Boom. And I think I'll simulate a depth of field as well, because these will now be a flat composition when we bring it into our top composition. We'll put a Gaussian blur on both of our friends, and we'll have the Gaussian blur have a value of 0 as Thomas comes in, and as John comes in, we'll have it go to say 50, and the reverse for when John's in shot. So now that's done, we're going to bring our Acts of War composition into our Chapter 5 Slate 5 comp. We need to arrange it in 3D space. We'll make it a 3D layer, we'll add motion blur, and we'll align it to where we want it in the composition. We basically need it to fall in the position where the camera pans up to. So we pan in, camera pans up, and there we go. Thomas comes in, and then Rockfeller comes in afterwards. We see the edge of Thomas, which isn't great. See him on the bottom on the left, and the camera pans in too quick to really see John. So we're going to have to just nudge everything around, maybe push this back in Z space and mess around with the scaling. We're basically just nudging this composition so it aligns with where we want it in space as well, so we can kind of cut out those borders. Tom and Rockfeller kind of disappear too quick, so we need the composition to be a little bit longer. We're going to go to our Act of War composition. We're going to press Command K, and we're going to up the length of the composition to say 9 seconds. And then just like we animated Thomas and John on, we're going to animate them off out of the composition as well, just because that help sell the effect a little bit and get rid of any risk of seeing borders. What I'm going to do now is I want to kind of bring Thomas Scott and JD Rockfeller alive a little bit, maybe add in some animations to their faces. So to do that, I'm going to go into the Thomas Scott pre-comp. I'm going to go to my Photoshop cutout, and I'm going to add an effect called Mesh Warp. And the idea here is I want Thomas Scott to go from like angry to a little bit scared, because now he's kind of invoked the rage of John. So we're going to do that with a Mesh Warp effect. Nice and easy. And the Mesh Warp effect essentially uses this grid as a way to kind of warp around the images, the image that you've got. So the more lines in this grid, the more you can manipulate individual parts of the image. You can distort them out of place. So it's really about finding a sweet spot of how many rows and columns you need. The more rows and columns you have, obviously, the more CPU power that you're going to be requiring. What I'm trying to do here is I'm just trying to make his eyebrows kind of go from like upset to scared. So I just need a grid line to kind of cross over with his brows. Straight out of the box is already pretty good. So I'll go to my distortion mesh warp effect. I'll go to distortion mesh, and I'm going to keyframe the distortion mesh, and let's have a look at what we got. There we go. So Thomas Scott goes from quite a pleasing look, looks quite all right, you know, doesn't look too angry, and then we're going to make him look really angry. Great. And we'll do the same for his mouth as well. So make him his mouth kind of close up a little bit in exactly the same way. We're just going to manipulate the distortion mesh, do that. And we're going to pre-compose this composition now, because now we're going to use what we've used in the past. We're going to use a puppet pin to kind of make it look like Thomas is looking up. So let's go ahead and do that. Pre-compose, move all attributes into composition, and let's put a few puppet pins in key places. Press Command P. Put a puppet pin in his head, puppet pin in his neck, maybe in 2 shoulders. So now let's go and keyframe the head. Let's bring the head from a downwards position to a looking up position. There we go. That's a nice little animation. We'll do exactly the same with John. Add the mesh warp, keyframe the mesh warp, and make John look livid. That's doing a pretty good job. And then we're going to pre-compose John. And we're going to use the puppet pins just to kind of make it look like John's looking up. And that looks good to me. I'm really happy with that. I think that we've done a lot to that image. And now if we look at that in situation, in the top comp, yep, that looks good to me. That looks really good to me. And just to add a little bit of extra drama to the scene, I think I'm going to put some like flames inside of John. So let's go to story blocks and get an alpha of some flames. Let's drag them into our Act of War composition. Let's duplicate our Thomas Scott layer, and let's duplicate our John D. Rockfeller layer, and let's use the duplicate of the JDR layer as an alpha matte for our fire. And then let's use the alpha matte of our TS Thomas Scott layer as an alpha matte for our second fire. And now it looks like there's flames kind of engulfing both of these characters. And I'm going to also parent the alpha to the movement of the JDR layer, just so the fire kind of like moves alongside of JDR. And I'll do the same with the Thomas Scott layer, so it doesn't look like this, the fire is static or independent of John or Tom. It looks like it's moving and attached to them, it's gripping onto them. Let's mess around with the blender mode as well. Maybe I'll go for, I don't know, an overlay maybe? An overlay? Overlay looks pretty good. And maybe I'll keep it as regular or on Thomas. Maybe add a little spark from story blocks. That'll look good. Let's go to our very top comp, and we'll get that to go off just as John and Thomas kind of go head to head in the scene. We'll put that to screen, and there we have it. We have John D. Rockfeller and Thomas Scott going head to head. Love that. We now have to have Thomas actually building these refineries. We've got some placeholder stuff. We've got a cooling tower on the hill and stuff like that, but we need to add some more. And now this is where the drill would be really handy, because we've made this asset in our very first story animation. Let's make the most of it, get the most bang for our buck. So I'm going to add our drill pre-comp to our scene. I'm going to make it a 3D layer. I'm going to add the motion blur, and I'm just going to kind of nudge it around in space. Also, at this point, when your compositions are getting this busy, I'd recommend lock-in compositions that you're not using anymore, that you know are, that are kind of done with, and shine them, just so you have kind of consolidated your work and you're not going to end up ruining anything, or potentially get confused by all the layers you've got. So let's shy some layers and let's lock them all up. I'm just going to leave the camera control, I'm going to leave the camera, and I'm going to leave the new drill. And I'm going to nudge that around in 3D space, put that in the foreground. Nice, like that. Let's move the cooling tower to the background, I think. Put another one as well. Duplicate that layer. And let's get those cooling towers popping up into the shot. Let's go to cooling tower 2. We'll go to hit P for position. We're going to separate our dimensions, and we're going to keyframe our Y position on the cooling tower. So it starts behind the hill, and then boom, pops up into shot. Lovely, nice and easy. Let's add a few more drills around the scene. A few more drills here and there, just kind of like to make it feel a little bit fuller. Cool, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the first half of the composition. I think that's looking really nice. So now I'm going to add like a VS to when John and Thomas butt heads. Just animate the letters VS on, and we'll do that within our Act of War composition. Great, so now we need to set up our very final part of the composition. I really want this final image to be powerful. I want it to be desolate, and I want it to kind of like, really pay off the last 38 seconds that we've kind of been working on. So I'm going to kind of create a little wasteland, with the Pennsylvania Railroad on it, and I want the building to be up in flames, essentially. So how are we going to do that? So I don't like this hill anymore. I'm going to have the hill kind of leave while Thomas and JDR are kind of like butting heads. So I'm going to have that kind of disappear, and I'm going to replace the floor with more of a kind of wastelandy vibes. Wasteland. So I'm going to unsplash. I'm kind of finding a wasteland. I think I found a good one here. A little bit of foreground information. Let's cut that out in Photoshop. Move that in position, make it a 3D layer, and just kind of push it around as to where it needs to be in space. I know I'm going to have to use a CC reptile on the wasteland, just because if I crop in too much, it's going to look like a close-up, and this needs to look like a wide shot. As you can see, it's kind of already in our composition way too soon, so I'm going to have it kind of pop up, finding a place where I can fade the image in, probably while Thomas and John are button heads, and then as the camera comes down, the wasteland will have faded in, and we can use that now for our next part of our composition. I'm going to also start to lay some extra information in the scene, maybe a rock or two here and there. We've already cut one out from earlier in our composition, which is great. Makes our job that bit simpler. Let's drag that into our top comp. Let's make a 3D layer, and let's just push it around where we think we want it to go. So there we go. So what have we got? So we got wasteland. That's kind of pulling out. Great. It's looking all right so far. It's not looking amazing, but it's looking pretty good. We've also added a little wiggle to the camera as well, just to kind of make it feel a little bit more rustic. Cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find like a desert. I'm going to find like a desert on Unsplash, like a top-down shot of a desert, and I'm going to have, in the same way that we did with the train track, I'm going to take the desert and I'm going to kind of like put it on its side, so it's literally like we're using a 3D layer to kind of pull through the scene. So I found one here that I like, and I'm going to drag it into my top comp, chapter 5, slate 5. I'm going to make it a 3D layer. I'm going to rotate it on its x-axis, make it flat. Going to mess around with the rotation of it. Cool, and just mess around with the position as well. It'll take a bit of nudging into position just to get this right, but I think that looks pretty good. That's looking all right now. It looks, we're going to see edges of the composition. That's fine. We'll clean that up with a mask. If we use the top-down view to mask around our wasteland layer and add a bit of feathering, as you can see now, we're starting to kind of blend this wasteland with our original kind of wasteland image. So it's really going to add a lot of depth to our shot. I think now what we need to do is we just need to go to our hue and saturation, take out the color from the desert wasteland. It needs to be kind of just dark and desolate, rather than a bit more saturated, kind of sandy color. So let's have a look what we're dealing with. Nice. That's looking really good. That's looking very, very good. It feels like a real scene now that we've spread those rocks and we've got a flat wasteland image. So we have our final set piece put together. We need to now have a building, which is going to have the Pennsylvania Railroad logo on it, and we're going to have that building on fire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 3D building. After Effects isn't traditionally used for 3D, but you can do 3D things in it. You just have to be a little bit thrifty, I suppose. You have to kind of the preference would be to use Cinema 4D, which is outside the scope of these tutorials. But After Effects still can do some really good work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a flat image of the front of a building, very like straight on to the building. That's the key thing that we need. We need the image to be straight on. I'll take that into Photoshop and I'm going to cut that out from the background, bring it into After Effects, and I'm going to make a composition called PRR, Pennsylvania Railroad. I'm going to drag the face of that building into that composition. Perfect. Now I'm going to make it a 3D layer, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to rotate the second 3D layer by 90 degrees. And if we use our camera tool, if we press C on our keyboards and just move the camera around, we can see what we're sort of doing here. We're basically going to simulate a 3D building just by nudging these two flat objects just in line with each other. So as you can see, we bring our camera around, we're already starting to kind of have a 3D effect just with two faces. We'll take some nudging into position. I'm going to do this with all four sides until you have a perfect cube without a roof, obviously, or a bottom. So there we go. We got a 3D Pennsylvania Railroad. I'm going to add the Pennsylvania Railroad logo onto the front of the building. Drag that in, and then just let's do a Luma key on it so we can only see the logo. Put it on the front of the building, right on the face. Maybe add some bushes to the front of the building just to add a bit of extra depth. Cut those out. Bit of grass as well. Feather, and just kind of add them again in 3D space using our camera tool. Just kind of have a look at what we're doing. Add a couple of these here and there. Put them on several sides of the building. I'm only going to plan on using the front face and the left face, so you only really need to kind of make these sides look good, really. So just messing around with putting some bushes in position. Cool, so now I'm going to add a little roof. I found a flat image of some tiles. Going to make a new composition with these tiles. I'm going to use the CC Reptile tool. Just kind of expand this texture. I'll do it with 2 reptile effects just so we've got it taking up the whole composition. Lovely. And now I can take this into my Pennsylvania Railroad composition, rotate it by 90 degrees on the x-axis, and I'll just kind of place it as a roof in a similar way to how I have with the faces. It's a little bit of a difficult one, this one, because the roof of this building is a little bit, it's not traditional. I can't just place this on top because it's got these angles. So I'm gonna make a 3D roof just to kind of hide these angles. So in exactly the same way as I did with the building, I'm just gonna add in faces on, and I'll use masks just to kind of cut these to length. I'll pre-compose this roof, and I'll press this little cog next to the Shy Guy layer just to collapse all our 3D properties into this layer. I'll mess around with the coloring just to make it match the building. And then we have ourselves a 3D house. Beautiful. So we are going to pop this in our top comp, chapter 5, slate 5. Make the 3D layer and collapse those 3D properties into the top comp again. We'll kind of nudge it into position. And there we go. As we can see, it sticks to the wasteland, which is exactly what we wanted. As you can see, we've got some issues with the roof layer, which is because we have perspective is different between the two compositions. So I'm just gonna make the roof layer a little bit smaller and go behind the front face of the building. There we go. Okay, so I've also noticed that I kind of want the camera to do like a little rotation, a little roll. That would be quite nice to include. So I'm going to go to my rotation value on my camera control. I'm just going to add a little rotation to give kind of like it gives kind of a more of an uneasy feel to the composition. So I'm going to add some fire to the Pennsylvania Railroad as well, and then we're just going to put them around the base of the building. Make sure they're 3D layers and that you're pushing them into space, and just put them at the foot of the building. Maybe add some sparks as well. Just add some sparks, and now I'm going to add, I want the final image to be John D. Rockefeller right at the front of the composition, because the final line, he declared war on the Pennsylvania Railroad, so we really want Rockefeller to be at the very front of this composition. So let's get an image of Rockefeller. Let's upscale him with AI, and let's take him into Photoshop, and let's cut him out as per usual. Let's make a new composition for him. Rock full body. We're going to drag that composition into our top comp. And drag them right at the front of the composition so the camera pans out and we see and reveals Rockefeller. Smash in. Now we're going to go into the Rockfeller comp, the rock full body, and we're going to use some puppet pins just to kind of animate the character a little bit, like we usually do. Nice, looking really good. So happy with the animation on Rockfeller. Now I'm just going to add my overlays from my previous compositions. So let's grab our particles, let's grab our vignette, and let's grab our adjustment layer, and obviously our texture as well. And just tweak in the illuminatory values and the tint on the adjustment layer just to suit this particular composition, and maybe even adjust the blending mode on the texture. Now going into my camera layer and turn it on the depth of field, up in the aperture a little bit. And now we've got to go through our entire composition, and we've got to keyframe our focal distance based on where we want the attention of the viewer to be. So we're going to push in, we're going to start focused on Thomas Scott. And we can use our top-down view to help us with this. Go to the background where we reveal his empire building. Then we're going to rack our focus towards John and Tom button heads. And then as we go into our final composition, our wasteland, we're going to want to start focus on the Pennsylvania Railroad on fire. And then we're going to shift focus to Rockfeller right at the front of the action like that. Let's take a look at that. I think I'll down the aperture a little bit because maybe I went a bit crazy with it. You don't, if you up the aperture too much, it might look a little bit too blurry in the background. So it is personal preference, but I generally tend to go for something like 70 pixels depending on my composition settings. And then just going to tweak the adjustment layer and colors that a little bit more, just because I feel like I'm washing out the colors a little bit of one overall kind of grade. Okay guys, so that is pretty much everything I'm going to do with this composition. So let's take a look at what we've created.
He started building his own oil refineries. Now, Scott was in direct competition with John, so John interpreted this as declaration of war. He decided to launch an all-out attack against America's most powerful company.
And there we have it, guys. That is the labor of a couple of days of work. As you can see, and as I've said throughout the process, it really is just the combination of a handful of After Effects principles and effects compounded together to create something that really is quite unique and bespoke. With that in mind, I hope you're able to take the principles that we spoke about over the last few days and implement them into your own animation and really create some bespoke stuff for your own projects.